The issues surrounding plagiarism can often be confusing and misunderstood, possibly resulting in fear, frustration, or confusion for students. This seminar, to your credit, using the words and ideas of others correctly, is intended to address your questions and your concerns regarding plagiarism and academic integrity. Whether the cause is human nature or lack of skill, any of us can have trouble with using sources. This segment discusses that. When we use sources, there are potential problems, and I want to talk about those problems in two areas. One are natural problems that we have just as human beings, because we forget things, and then about skill-based problems. So we'll talk about those two areas and try to help us understand how we can overcome some of those issues when we're using other people's words and other people's ideas. Now, as human beings, we mix things up. For example, if you go to a party tonight and you meet 50 people, the next day, are you going to remember all 50 people's names? I don't think so. Are you going to remember where they're all from, what they're all studying? No. So as a human being, we mix up words and ideas. So the more sources we use, the more possible confusion there are. So for example, as a first-year student, you might only be using 4 or 5 sources. However, graduate students could be using 100 or 200 different sources. So you can imagine, if you use 200 sources, it's going to be easier to confuse whose idea was that. Another problem we have is we sometimes feel like an idea is our own. So we read many, many different sources, and we start taking that inside of ourselves, and we get a little bit confused whether, was that my idea? Was that someone else's idea? So those are kind of human, natural reasons why we have problems when we use sources. There's also skill-based reasons. Sometimes we just do not know the proper citation method, and so we get things confused, and it perhaps looks like we've plagiarized, or it looks like we've misused a source for that reason. So we need to know what citation format we're using, the proper citation format, and all the rules affixed to that particular format. Additionally, we sometimes just simply forget to give credit to people. We use their words, but we don't give proper credit. We're not sure how to do that. And I want us later in this seminar to talk about how we can make sure we give proper citation, proper credit to people's words and people's ideas. Now, plagiarism can be very confusing. I don't know how many of you find plagiarism confusing, but I think it is confusing. So I want to talk about 5 reasons why plagiarism can be confusing both to students and to faculty at times. The first reason is that different institutions, while they define plagiarism more or less the same way, they give different penalties and different consequences for misuse of sources. And that can be confusing for students. So if you've come from a different institution, you need to make sure that you understand how this institution works with plagiarism, how this institution not only defines plagiarism, but how it punishes plagiarism, what are the consequences, and very strictly its definition of plagiarism. The second reason why plagiarism can be very confusing has to do with disciplines. Each discipline is different in the way they use sources. So for example, in some science disciplines, students are discouraged from quoting. And if you're discouraged from quoting and you want to use someone else's words or ideas, you then need to do what? You need to paraphrase or you need to summarize. Now, which is more difficult, paraphrasing or quoting? It seems to me paraphrasing and summarizing are much more difficult than quoting. So if your discipline doesn't allow you to use quotations, then you're going to have to learn to paraphrase and summarize appropriately. As well, different disciplines have different needs as to how many sources you might be able to use, how you might use them. So your job as a student is to understand your discipline and understand how sources are used within the context of that discipline. The third reason why plagiarism can be very confusing is teachers. Teachers, before they were teachers, believe it or not, were actually people. So they're very different in the way they address individuals. So one teacher might feel like, well, it's your first time, so you know what, let's not worry about it, just don't do it again. Another teacher, who's maybe had many, many cases of plagiarism over the years, gets very upset, very offended, and they smell plagiarism, and they right away send you off to the discipline office. So teachers are going to treat you differently, and you might have 4, 5, 6 different teachers every semester, and that can be confusing to you as a student. The fourth reason that I want to talk about that makes plagiarism a little bit confusing is the issue of culture. Now, some of you will have come from different cultures, and what we have to understand is that different cultures deal differently with these issues of academic integrity, plagiarism, honesty. Cultures have different values, cultures have different constructs on the way they use sources. So what's important for you to understand is when you are in Canada, when you're at the University of Alberta, you are in two cultures. The first culture you're in, of course, is you're in Canadian culture. And that's one, and that has certain values, certain standards, certain views towards integrity. But more importantly, you're in an academic culture. And when you're in an academic culture, you abide by the rules of the academic culture. Okay? So you need to understand this academic culture. And the academic culture is quite different than, for example, the business culture, the professional culture. So what you can do as an engineering student in the university is going to be different than what you can do as an engineering student as a professional. And that can be confusing to students, especially if a student has come back from working in a profession and then coming back to university. It can be a very confusing relationship. The last thing I want to talk about is technology. Now, this may seem odd to you, but I think technology has caused some confusion for us over the years. So now I'm going to be honest here. I'm going to go way back when I did my first degree. So it was 1983. Now, what are the differences in 1983? What do we have now that we didn't have in 1983? Most of you are going to say right off the bat, computers. People had computers in 1983, but no one had personal computers. So guess how I did my essay? Did I use a computer? No. What did I use? Typewriter, exactly. So guess what? If I wanted to write a paper, what did I have to do? I had to go to the university, bring a whole pile of books back to my office or my room. Then I would sit there, and if I really was lazy and I wanted to not, oh, I don't want to do the work, this time once, I'll just copy, I would have had to open a book and sit at my typewriter and copy every single word out of that typewriter, okay, on that typewriter. So, does that mean students many years ago cheated more or less? No. What it means, though, to me is the gap was very different. If I had to copy directly from a book onto my typewriter, it took time. I was very aware this is someone else's material. Nowadays, if you wanted to copy, how long does it take you? 2 seconds. Cut, copy, paste, it's in your paper. And we're used to doing that. And it causes all kinds of problems, both in the kind of the psychological gap and also the time gap. So I think technology has produced some interesting problems for us as students and perhaps as instructors on how we deal with issues of plagiarism. So plagiarism can be confusing, and that's okay if you're confused. Your job is to make sure you understand how your teacher deals with it, how your discipline deals with it, and how your university deals with it. And once you've had that established, the confusion of much of the issues of plagiarism will be settled for you.